Anyways, on to obviously the best movie of today's show, Kickboxer 2 from 1991. So the story for this one centers around David, a brother of Kurt and Eric Sloan from the first movie. He's struggling to keep his gym open, and an opportunity comes along to work for an upcoming kickboxing federation, but he doesn't care so much. He doesn't care much for them because he's a bit of a purist and thinks they're sucking the life out of the sport that he loves with drugs and crooked play and all that kind of stuff. So eventually we find out that some ruthless Thai businessmen are using the association to scope out David for a revenge match with the evil Tong Po in an attempt to regain their honor from the brutal loss suffered to Kurt Sloan in the first film. I mean, it's no secret to you and to a bunch of other people who probably listen by now that this is one of my all-time favorite movies. And I also enjoy the original movie, but I still think this one's way better, for a number of reasons that I'm sure I'll get to. In fact, before I get to all those reasons, I'll just get your general thoughts on the movie first.
I thought it was decent.
That's your general thoughts. Yeah, it was decent.
I mean, yeah, movie was... I'll just say it like this. I can't help but compare the Kickboxer and Bloodsport series, because I'm watching all these movies around the same time, and I would say this movie is definitely better than Bloodsport 2 was. So, there you go.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, well, see I could pull out a whole lot of different things about the movie that I like more than the original. I mean, okay, let's start with the soundtrack. I think the soundtrack for this one, there's some really good songs here, and I think at least the first song and the last song in the movie were written for the movie, or at least you can't find them anywhere else. The only place you can find them is in this movie. So, the opening song really gets you fired up, and then it also has a nice rock song at the end as well. And not just the songs, but also the music that they play throughout the movie. I think it's all constructed quite well. Did you have any thoughts on the music, or you just like, didn't really pay attention?
I didn't have a big issue with it, but I mean, to me, it just felt like a lot of, generic 80s, music. Some for South, some for us, I mean, I did have a problem with it, but it didn't strike me as anything particularly special. Aside from that song at the end, which I did sort of like.
So the lead actor in it, Sasha Mitchell, who plays David Sloan. The funny thing is, I can't remember if I watched this movie before or after seeing the original movie. I can't recall, but I saw both at a very young age, and I saw this one when it was a new release. I remember renting it out on VHS and watching it with my dad, and I guess Sasha Mitchell's character in the movie is someone that I saw as a bit of a role model. He's a bit of a clean-cut guy with good values, and I always saw him as, he's someone type of character that I wanted to be like, growing up as a kid. Which is kind of funny because I know you haven't seen any of the other sequels, but his character is so different in every other movie in the franchise. In part 3, he's a bit more like this character that he plays in the 90s sitcom Step by Step. Are you familiar with that show?
Unfortunately not.
Sasha Mitchell in that show, he kind of plays kind of like a dumb but lovable type character, easily the most popular character on the show. And he's a lot more like that in Kickboxer 3. He's a little more funnier. He's got a bit of a silly side to him. And then in part 4, he completely flips the script and he goes all dark and brooding. so all 3 different movies that he's in this series, his character just feels different. But that's neither here nor there. But another big thing that people who enjoy the original movie in this series, they really don't like the fight scenes in this movie. I could look at YouTube videos and some people would be like, oh, look at this horrible fight choreography. And
I guess my only comment on that, I do think the slow motion was a bit much.
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for that. And I believe it's because I think a part of it they needed to pad the runtime a little bit.
I can see why.
But not necessarily that was something they were doing from the outset, but they had to cut certain scenes in the movie as well. Apparently there was a fight scene with in the middle of the movie, you know, the flashback sequence where they show Tong Po murdering Kurt Sloan. They were actually meant to have a fight, and there's rumors that that fight was actually way better than any other fight in the movie, so they decided to cut it because they didn't want the best fight to not be at the end. So that's a rumor. I've never seen any footage of that. People claim there's a VHS out there that has it, but I call bullshit on it, because if there was, it'd be up on YouTube by now. I mean, the movie's almost 30 years old. We would have seen this footage by now. I don't believe it exists. I've even tried to get the answers from the director. He didn't really give me too much info about it. But anyways, the fight choreography in the movie, it's done by Benny Urquidez, who I believe is an undefeated kickboxer. And he's also done fight scenes in movies. He's even had a fight scene against Jackie Chan in one movie. If you ever watch, like, a real kickboxing match, it's not all that entertaining unless, you know, you're a purist, like someone who enjoys the actual martial art aspect of it. But if you're in it just to see someone get their ass kicked, it's not exactly the most entertaining type of fight you can watch. So I will say that, and I know this is the thing he was trying to do in the movie, is to make it feel like more of a real kickboxing match. Whereas you see the original movie, you got Van Damme doing all these fancy kicks and splits and stuff. The type of shit you'll never see in a real kickboxing match. And it may make for a less entertaining fight, but at the same time, I think it makes maybe a little more realistic.
Yeah, I will say the scene in which they sort of trick the guy into coming to watch his friend fight. that whole scene when the guy was just getting beat down, that was pretty painful to watch.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me. There was a I don't know who it was, but there was a quote at some point, sort of recently, from like a UFC fighter. I don't know if it was a boxer or a UFC fighter, but it was basically saying, you know, we're in a sport where, or one of the few places where you can legally kill someone. Like, just by, you know, hitting them really hard, you can kill them. I mean, and that's basically what happens here. I mean, technically, even though you can kill someone in the ring for beating the shit out of them, it's not really illegal. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to think about. Well, I mean, obviously, if you go too far and you're really reckless and careless. I mean, he was in this movie, but...
Yeah, I would say, like, picking up the referee and throwing him out of the ring might have been a problem.
Yeah. But, I mean, if he didn't do all those things and he still killed the guy, you know, there's not much he could have really done about it. But I can't help but compare some things, obviously, from this movie to the original movie, and things about this movie that I like more. Like, the end scene is the end fight to this movie is actually quite bloody, and I mean you're fighting with shards of glass on your hand. I expect it to be bloody, and they did the same thing in the original movie, but there wasn't all that much blood. There was just one or two cuts here and there, nothing major. So that's another thing I really enjoyed. You know, there's a lot of blood-soaked mayhem in that last fight.
I also like seeing the I forget the character's name, but the guy in the suit. I like seeing his ass get kicked too. That was good stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of notable veteran type actors in this movie as well. You may or may not be familiar with Peter Boyle, but
yes, I have seen quite a bit of Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah.
And also, he doesn't look any different here, by the way.
No. Maybe a few less wrinkles, but pretty much the same. And yeah, like you said, the one guy gets his ass kicked in the suit, Kerry Tagawa. He's been in a long list of movies. You know, he was Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat, which a lot of people, you know, a lot of people bring that up, but he's been in a long list of movies as well. And even he kind of like plays David's accountant or whatever you want to call him in this movie, John Deal. I don't know if you're familiar with the Angel movies from the 80s. I think it's from the 80s.
I've heard about them. I've never actually seen them.
Yeah, he plays. I've only seen the original one once, but he plays like a maniac type slasher character in it. He's like the bad guy in it, and from what I remember, he played a pretty intense slasher type character. I should check out that movie again, but it's just kind of weird to see him do something completely different. But yeah, and another thing, I mean, I'm just rattling off from a list of things that I think this movie does better. But like the villain Tong Po in this movie, played by the same actor. In this movie, they don't need to really do anything to make him scary. He's pretty intimidating. Where, you know, he kind of just stares at you. He kind of moves a bit like a Terminator. You know, he'll let you hit him around a bit, and doesn't look like it phases him at all.
He doesn't have much of an emotional depth.
Yeah, he almost feels like he's got the look of a human, but he just feels like he isn't there. Like, you know, he doesn't really care if he kills you or what. And in the original movie, just a couple of things that don't really hurt my enjoyment of the original, but in the original they make him a rapist. They fix the final fight. The fact that they fix the final fight, to me, I know they just want to secure the win, but at the same time it shows a little bit of uncertainness about, you know, they're not all that confident that he's going to win, I guess. You know, you should expect the bad guy to be the favorite. And in this movie, no pun intended, it's more of a David and Goliath type thing. David Sloan.
Okay.
That's where the pun potentially came from there. But when you think about it, the bad guy in this movie, he comes in, he's all in shape. He's fighting a guy who is clearly not as skilled as Van Damme's character from the first movie, but at the same time he's also still sort of recovering from a pretty terrible leg injury. So you're going into the fight thinking he'd probably get his ass kicked and potentially killed. I mean, in the original Kickboxer, you kind of go in, I mean, if you just look at Van Damme, he's got muscles popping out of every part of his body, even out of his neck and stuff. But he looks like he's just going to go in and fucking kick some ass and maul the guy, which I guess is why they needed to blackmail him. But I just think, even though it's a little cliched, you know, the hero being the underdog, I think it's always good to see the underdog come over on top at the end.
I mean, I will say one thing that somewhat disappointed me. I don't think they spent nearly enough time on like the training sequences. You know, I liked the little bit that we got, but you know that made up a somewhat large portion of the first movie. And the character, you know, the Asian guy who's training him, I forget his name right now. You know, it was nice seeing him again, but I don't know if he really brought as much to this movie as he did the first one.
He brought the comic relief.
Some comic relief.
It's got half-price tickets to Disneyland.
That was a nice opening line.
What about the part where he's like, if you don't want me to tell the story, you must make me stop. And he's like, fine, tell me the stupid story about this stupid fucking mouse. So he's like, very well, if you insist.
Yeah, no, admittedly, I did crack up during that line.
Another just notable thing that you may find interesting, you remember, well, right towards the beginning of the movie, there's that one kid who is, taking swings at David while he's blindfolded. You
Indeed.
Remember that? Yeah. That's Brian Austin Green, who you may remember from the movie Chrome Skull. You know, the guy who gets a tattoo at the end?
Huh, that's that guy? Huh.
Yeah, that's him. I don't know, just amusing to see people so young and then you match them to some movie they've been in more recently. And
Yeah, I never in a trillion years with regards to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just thought you'd appreciate that. But
I think he did better in this movie than he did in the film cut.
Well, he got a lot less screen time, so maybe that's it.
Although, that reminds me, like, the whole, like, sort of cliche ending, like, everything's good again. I don't want to spoil too much about this movie if you haven't seen it, but the ending to the first movie, seems like everything's okay. Then we watch this movie, and we found out that a sizable amount of people from the first movie are just gone, which, sort of really puts a depressing tone on that.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, Van Damme was originally meant to be in this movie. Well, I guess one of the things to highlight is the guy that wrote this movie went on to write, a lot of big movies. Yeah, so David Goyer, he's a very popular writer now in Hollywood. So, and this is either his first or second movie that he wrote. I can't recall exactly which one, but I think it might have been his second. But apparently Van Damme took a liking to him and asked him to write this movie. And then eventually, it's never really fully come out as to exactly why Van Damme wasn't in it, but I believe it's because of the money. It's not a very big budget movie, this one, and at that point he was actually starting to really make a lot of money in Hollywood, and partially I think, scheduling conflicts with other movies he was filming where he was making a lot more money, that would have played into it as well. So eventually, even though he got David Goyer to write this movie, he eventually dropped out of the movie, so I guess they, had to write it for a completely different character. Now, I've actually got one of Goyer's original scripts for this movie, one of the few rare people in the world to have it, so that just shows how big of a fan I am of it. But in one of the original versions of the script, and I think a lot of people actually don't know this, there's a lot of mention in that script about David kind of being more like a adopted brother, not an actual blood brother.
Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, was it mentioned in the first movie that there was another brother?
No, a lot of people cling to this one scene early in the original Kickboxer where the two brothers are talking about, one spent his time with their dad and the other spent most of his time with their mum, and they just don't mention a brother. So a lot of people are like, well, if they had a brother, they would have mentioned him there, which, I mean, yeah, maybe, but I think they still get away with it.
I mean, it's a difficult situation, especially if it was planned for Van Damme to come back. So, I mean, I get, once the movie came out, there's nothing they could really do to fix it.
Yeah. And, I mean, the guy that plays Tong Po in this movie, originally he wasn't in the script. And eventually, I think maybe, I don't know if it was because Van Damme wasn't in, they asked him if he wanted to be in it. And I don't think he actually really liked so much how this movie was written, but he wanted to be in it just because in the original movie, he never got his actual name credited. Like his actual stage name. They called him Tong Po in the credits. No one knows who Tong Po is. It's a fictional character. So in this movie, he actually got his stage name in the credits to actually make a bit of a name for himself.
Yeah, I feel like if you don't, especially him not getting his name in the credits in the first movie, you could say that's a kick in the face.
Yeah, well, he said they asked him to do it, and he agreed to it just, because he was young and he didn't want to, rub anyone the wrong way, and because sometimes when you do that, it affects you getting work in the future. So, anyways, that's mainly why he came back and did this movie, because he'd finally get his name in the credits of a pretty big, well, somewhat big movie, because this movie did get played at the theaters, at least in a bit of a limited run, so that's why he did that.
How many times have you seen this movie?
This week? Oh, jeez. We're going up near the 100 mark, I think. Yeah, it's, I don't know. Maybe I've broken 100 views. I don't know, but it's up
like
there.
10 times a year.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been out for almost 30 years, so, that's 3 or 4 times a year. I mean, but, well, back then when it came out, I didn't exactly have it on VHS. Buying movies back then was a lot more difficult to do. Yeah, no, I've seen it a lot. Anyways, we've probably talked about this one for a long time. You probably, I can hear the itching you really want to get to without warning.
Oh boy.
So we'll just I'll just go ahead and read it. So it's my all-time favorite non-horror movie. It's right up there with Child's Play, my all-time favorite movie. So I give it a 10 out of 10. I don't need to go through too much more about why I like it. I think I've spent 20 plus minutes talking about that. And I'll leave it to you for your rating.
Yeah, so I enjoyed this movie. I mean, I had a good enough time with it. I didn't like it as much as the first movie. But it was still an okay movie. And like I said, it's nowhere near as bad as the Saga of Bloodsport was. So I'm just going to give this one, like, I think, a 7 out of 10. Like, which is an average rating for me. I mean, it's an okay movie. I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to see it again anytime soon, but I mean, it's fine. It's nothing like majorly wrong with it. It just wasn't quite as enthralling as the first one was. So there you go.
That's a woman's bullshit rating.